Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. What is the Air Accident Investigation Branch? Give us a little bit of background on where that sits within the organizational structure, its connection with the civil aviation and space flight in the UK.
We're effectively an independent organisation, so we're we're funded by central government, DFT, but our role is to investigate all accidents and serious incidents involving civil aviation within the UK and its overseas territories, and where appropriate on abroad as well. So we've been around since 1915. That's when we were effectively stood up. And as I sort of stated, we're sort of tasked with sort of investigating accidents and incidents, serious incidents involving civil aviation. So that's fixed wing aircraft, helicopters, gliders, unmanned aerial vehicles or drones.
I was going to say that I'm going to stick a pin in that, because I bet that's something interesting I'd love you to expand on maybe a little bit further down our conversation, because that has been, I remember reading something that people didn't know where to put it, because it was they've had to create a whole thing in and of itself, a big sort of headache for airports and all sorts.
Yeah, it's a massive growth area. And the technology is rapidly evolving.
Oh, mate. I can only imagine when Amazon or someone like that gets hold of it, whatever the legislation is that holds it back, when that gets unlocked, for want of a better description, things are going to really change gears, aren't they? We'll see them everywhere. It'll be ridiculous. It'll be like space age stuff.
It's this, what they call urban air mobility, this effectively where, potentially sort of you're going to have, it's going to be like a taxi type environment, that you're going to be able to, I think that's the sort of the ultimate aim. I think we're still a long way away from that, but it's eventually, we'll get there.
It'd be weird though, won't it? It'd be like walking out into a swarm.
Yeah, so there are lots of issues there with regards sort of not only sort of if we got the actual vehicles themselves, but you've got airspace segregation, etc. It's a massive area that requires sort of
We need to have a very intentional approach into that, don't we? It's not something that we can. It's one of those things that you could accidentally knee jerk into, or if someone hasn't got the hands on the reins properly and it just gallops away, and then you're like, oh crikey. Where on earth have we gotten ourselves to? Trying to reverse that would be very difficult. I wanted you to take us back, if we could, please, and I apologise if this is a bit too much of a stretch in the mind, because I appreciate none of us were around then. What provoked the establishment of it? You said it was established in 1915. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show.
Yeah, well, again, it was sort of if you can imagine, right at the very beginning of sort of aviation as such. It sort of evolved, and during the sort of the First World War, there was sort of obviously you had a rapid growth then in sort of aviation sort of thing, and as all, unfortunately, as is the way with conflicts and wars, it tends to sort of you get massive technology.
It's sad, isn't it? Because they often do lend themselves to some of the greatest technological advancements, but it comes at a weird cost. It's a strange square to circle in your head, because we obviously don't want these things, but the war engine creates a lot of innovation and drive and a lot of financial incentive as well.
Yeah, so effectively you had sort of a rapid sort of growth or development of aviation within the First World War. That's really when it started to progress. And again, there were sort of, again, at that very early stage of aviation, you can imagine, accidents were fairly common. So it was seen really as at the time to again set up an authority or an investigation agency to try and again prevent accidents occurring and learn lessons from the said accidents and incidents. And that sort of philosophy has been maintained. It's still our sort of the reason we exist now is to sort of investigate all sort of accidents and serious incidents and to determine the causes to sort of prevent reoccurrence. And that essentially, that philosophy, was started right back in the early 1900s, 1915, as I say, when we were stood up, and is basically why we're still doing what we do today. And kind of, we were at the forefront of accident investigation. In many respects, we still are.
Have you ever read a book called Black Box Thinking?
I've not read that. No.
So it's by a guy called Matthew Syed, and the beginning introduction to it is read by a guy called Martin Bromley, who we had on the podcast. His wife, Elaine Bromley, unfortunately had terrible brain trauma from an operation that went wrong. She was basically put under anaesthetic and it went wrong and they tried to intubate her, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, he was a pilot and he flew the big Airbuses and all this sort of stuff. And not through case of blame, but he was very interested as to understand as to the lack of investigation that takes part in our clinical environments and in our hospitals and NHS and all this sort of jazz. Because again, he comes from his profession is it is a professional pilot. He's obviously very familiar with a lot of the investigations that have gone on in aviation and how thorough they are. And it led to a lot of the migration of the crew resourcing models that they use in cockpits and things like that. So he was a big driver of that and did a lot of talks globally on it. And the point I'm bringing it up is, why have we been so on the front foot when it comes to investigation in aviation versus other sectors? And also the question around why the investigation branch sits totally external. Like, help me understand, because in rail and whatnot, are they all private companies or are some of them owned by the government? Because I imagine in aviation, they're all, other than the military aspects, they're all private companies.
Yeah, they're all private. I mean, again,
yeah. So someone they can't mark their own homework, I suppose, can they?
Yeah, but what the important point to make out is we're not a regulator. So the regulator for the UK aviation is the Civil Aviation Authority. Okay. In the US, it's the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority. So each country will have its regulator. Mm-hmm. Who's in charge and is responsible for sort of looking after the airworthiness requirements, the licensing of aircrew, etc. And the reason we're independent is because it's about getting to the sort of the root cause of what accidents, and people can. And the philosophy is that people or sort of involved can come and speak to us and give statements without sort of fear of there being sort of I'm going to say reprisal, but
100%,
because we're
interested in the truth and not necessarily in the blame.
Exactly, we're a sort of there's no blame attached to any of our sort of. If you look at our reports, investigations, it is a total no blame sort of culture, which again is what. The CAA again, and aviation itself, it's one of the principles, a no blame culture. But unfortunately, there's at some point there is always a sort of a merging of that. Yeah,
when you cross into the commercial aspects and someone's pennies are on the line, they sometimes want to scapegoat or to hold somebody accountable. You can kind of get it to an extent, because if there's someone that's got a track record of mistakes, you're not going to want them operating big, dangerous aircraft. But in the same respect, that can heavily, and we have this in the emergency services. So I worked in an operational assurance department for a period of time, and we would run big, structured, tactical, strategic, whatever it might be, debriefs. And there could be a reticence for people to own not their mistakes, but sometimes their misinterpretations, their initial assessments of a scene, through fear of reprisal, through fear of not looking professional, not sort of an accusation of their competency, perhaps.
I'm just reading Sabrina Cohen-Hatton's book on incident management, and she sort of touches on the sort of the CRM effectively, and how that, again, they've looked to sort of introduce that kind of principle. I know, as you've mentioned, within healthcare now, sort of it's gaining traction. But again,
it does move at a glacial pace, though, doesn't it? Because like she's referring to the same stuff that I'm referring to, and this stuff is old. Crew resource managing is 10, 15. Oh, I mean, you'll probably know far better than me. This is very, very old stuff.
Goes back to probably there was I should say it was an incident in Heathrow, London Heathrow, in the early 70s, where a commercial airliner sort of departed, unfortunately crashed soon after takeoff, and the sort of the crew interaction then, as part of our investigation, we identified that as a sort of, that was one of the sort of causal factors. And so, CRM developed from sort of the early sort of 70s as regards improving aviation safety. And just to touch a little bit, go back as to why, well, unfortunately, aviation is a very unforgiving environment. So, and that consequently, I mean, if you look at the accident rate in the 1900s, in comparison to now, it was far, far higher. So,
what sort of numbers are we talking? If you could hazard a guess at the percentages.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you a figure, but the sort of the upward trend in I mean, now I think sort of and again, this is just a sort of a random figure. I think if in terms of sort of commercial airliners, I think statistically you'd have to fly take a flight, so a random flight every day for something like 125,000 years before you'd be involved in an accident. So that just shows.
And when we say accident, that doesn't inherently mean a fatal one either, just an error of some form.
Yeah. Well, that is a fatal.
Oh, fatal. Sorry. Okay.
So that just shows the progression and why sort of the advances and all the sort of the hard work that's been done in aviation and has led to that sort of significant improvement in sort of safety. And that I mean, we're talking commercial fair playing airliner type environment. Obviously the general aviation, we're still significantly way behind that in terms of sort of the accident rate. But again, there's been massive improvements.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. When we say the general aviation, is that like hobbyists and people of interest with perhaps smaller winged aircraft like gliders or
so basically your private flyer, a private pilot who sort of
there's been a massive upswing in like private helicopters, hasn't there, in the last 15-20 years?
There has been, although it's dipped now. It's there's still about, but it's in comparison to fixed wing aviation or light aircraft, helicopters are far more expensive to operate. There's probably a tendency now to sort of I don't think we're quite that there are the numbers of sort of effectively light helicopters flying. And again, when you look at sort of fixed wing aviation in the last sort of 20-25 years, you've had the growth of what we call ultralight aviation. So that's sort of aircraft that are 500 kilos.
Oh, the sort of exoskeletons with the
Yeah,
small wings. What are
yeah,
they
yeah,
called?
yeah.
Yeah.
So they call them ultralights, but
Ultralight, sorry, yeah.
so that sort of growth has made sort of
I've been
thick.
to a couple of them.
Yeah, well, I occasionally fly in one, so it's
Okay.
but yeah. But again, it's affordable aviation for
Yeah.
it
How are
is.
those things powered? I know I'm going to take us in a million directions, sorry, but so some of the things we would love to establish from our conversation today, we're going to go into a few historical cases. We're going to talk about some watch outs, some early things for first responders, perhaps firefighters and other responding first responders to look at in these. But I suppose this is maybe a nice little segue to start with, is the fueling of those types of things, because when you do see aircraft incident on a tip sheet, it can provoke a little flutter, to be honest, because I have in my head some 747, before you start getting a bit more of the detail.
Yeah. Well, as you're probably aware, you're probably, the most common incident a firefighter is likely to attend is going to be probably a small light aircraft or helicopter incident as regards a commercial sort of incident. I mean, sort of your ultralights and your light aircraft, in terms of the fuel, it's either going to be MOGAS or motor gas or what they call aviation gasoline or avgas. So again, avgas is quite volatile, so has quite it's sort of
Quite a low flash point.
low flash point. So if whereas sort of jet A1 or sort of jet fuel has a sort of significantly higher flash point, but will auto ignite, I think I'm getting this right, at sort of a lower temperature than avgas.
Oh, really?
So there is a difference. So avgas, you're more likely, a light aircraft, you're potentially going to get, when you get a spark and the vapor, you're more likely to get a flash fire there. Whereas sort of jet aircraft or jet fuel, you're not likely so much to get a sort of a vapor fire. It's more down to sort of when the liquid itself will ignite, and that will ignite at a lower temperature than avgas.
Wow. So when we are, there's another thing actually I'm going to need to remember is about contamination. I was at Beacon Hill Airport recently. And they were talking a lot about contamination with reference to gases, the type of aviation fuels that are used, and certain particulates that were specifically in there. I apologize. I know this isn't something we necessarily said we would discuss, but again, just one of the many, many hazards that are posed to operational crews that you don't really ever even think about. But these places, the way a lot of these vehicles are designed, the air vehicles, they're off-gassing constantly, and there's a massive exchange of contaminants and carcinogens at a lot of these places that I don't think we're ever really minded to think about.
No, it's obviously, and I mean, you can look at and again, the fire service is sort of now the progress in terms of dealing with the VOC UFP issue is striding forward quite significantly. I mean, yes, it's something that we are sort of looking at ourselves, because again, we are exposed. We go to sort of incidents where an aircraft has caught fire. It's approximately 30 to 40% of the incidents that we attend will involve an aircraft that's sort of been involved with a fire. So, and although we're not generally will be there once the fire has been extinguished, you're still in that warm, cold sort of steam.
I think that's the most dangerous point for investigations, because you're almost, from a sensory perspective, you are under the illusion that this is a safe environment now and the hazard has passed because all the emergency services have left. But there's a great many hazards, and you just have to cast your mind back and think that people were investigating long before your time, the things they were exposing themselves to. Yeah.
So in terms of, sort of exposures, whether it's a structure or it's an aircraft, potentially it's going to outgas for anything up to 3-4 weeks after the fire has been extinguished. And, so that represents quite a significant issue for us in terms of our exposure. And this is now what we're looking to sort of we're hoping to sort of start some studies to actually get some quantifiable data to determine exactly what's being sort of released from these scenes. And the issue as well is we often bring the wreckage back to Farnborough to allow us to do a detailed forensic engineering examination. And we're then sort of putting sort of that wreckage within a confined environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're sort of hoping this year to start a study to start sort of as I said.
And again, it's not a thing of apportion and blame. It's just a case of if we'd have known better, we'd have done better. Yeah. Now we've realised this. Let's put in some appropriate extraction systems and whatnot.
Our PPE protocols we've developed over many years. So in terms of on scene, again, not only are we exposed to the sort of the fire side of it, but also unfortunately we're quite often dealing with, and again you'll know from your RTCs, unfortunately when there's significant body trauma. We're our PPE protocols are pretty robust. That's not to say that we need to improve and we need to sort of see what we can do better. But and again, I'm sort of quite heavily involved with John Lord and now various airports in terms of the sort of the particulate sort of and the VOC issue. Again, about sort of joint learning. So
that's what this is all about, brother. 100%. Because I often think exchanges we've had before this, I almost feel a sense of guilt because I'm like, God, how few people are going to get an opportunity to ever speak to somebody like Karl and be able to get this sort of detailed information. I just wanted to try and close the loop because I know we're going to go in a whole bunch of different directions, but as we've already started to unfold it a little bit, if we could just close the loop on the ultralights and just sort of rule off some generic hazards that people are coming to with these, because you referenced the fuel. What's the rough sizing of these? I know some of this is generic and it's hard to capture all in a very short conversation, but the generic hazards, because as we referenced, these are like an exoskeleton style thing, usually only one or two persons, aren't they?
Yeah, so typically it would be sort of two persons, two POB. So you're sort of your main hazards is obviously going to be fuel. Then there's always the electrical sort of issues, so sort of batteries, etc., the electrical system. So very sort of similar to when you deal with an RTC, those are the similar hazards. When it starts sort of diverging sort of quite significantly is, I think people don't tend to consider sort of pressurized vessels. And by that, I mean tyres. It's quite sort of, it's not uncommon for us to turn up on a scene and find that the paramedics have been using sort of the tyres as a pincushion for their hypos. Which,
wow, okay.
And even light aircraft tyres, they are sort of inflated to quite high pressures. So, but again, so you've got to be mindful of that. And again, and the main reason, sort of one of the main reasons I'm talking to you today is about this sort of the BPRS or Ballistic Parachute Recovery System or BRS, Ballistic Recovery System, that you can find on predominantly ultralight aircraft, but also there are types of what we sort of call certified aircraft, the Cirrus group of aircraft, particularly, and we dealt with an incident last week at Duxford where a BRS was fitted to the aircraft and it fired shortly after the aircraft impacted the ground. So this
BRS, because as whilst we're heading in that direction, the Ballistic Recovery System. So just cycle back a little bit, help us. And again, remember, we're talking to a knuckle dragging firefighter. Give me an understanding of, I always say people, take me where I am, like meet me where I am and then try and take me towards where you are. So we're obviously familiar with SRS systems in vehicles, rollover protection, airbags, things like that. So minor minor explosive devices and charges involved in some of these types of things. But when we're looking at BRS systems, where would we traditionally find these? What's the purpose of them, and what danger do they pose?
So the purpose of them is to sort of a pilot, if he's sort of flying at, say, altitude, so typically it's got to be greater than 1,500 foot.
Okay.
If the engine fails, he can basically pull a cable, which then is attached to a rocket system igniter. This fires a rocket, which basically then will propel a parachute out of the aircraft, and then the parachute will deploy and then allow the aircraft to gently float to the ground.
Oh, wow. So this is designed to recover and save the entire aircraft.
Yeah.
So it's not, as other people might be perceiving at our initial start of our conversation, this is not an ejector seat style personal parachute for the pilot themselves.
No. And the big issue is that it's only effective at sort of 1,500 foot.
I was going to say, if something's travelling too fast or too high, I imagine the G-force involved in deploying something like that is going to be fairly horrific to the passenger.
Yeah, but again, the majority, it's only sort of in, shall we say, light general aviation aircraft.
But they're the most common ones we'll probably attend, like you say, outside of a standard airfield.
There are now there's I think one jet where one of these sort of systems is sort of available and can be used. But yeah, just going back to the BRS, it will deploy, but the issue is most accidents will take off or happen at the sort of the takeoff and landing phase, and where you can't deploy these So, often we'll arrive at a scene, or you guys, the FRS, will arrive at a scene, and you've got one of these things in situ that's sort of then been subjected to
mechanical damage of some form,
or thermal shock. And the issue also becomes is if there's been significant distortion to the fuselage, and these things operate on effectively a cable, this cable's under tension. So
it's like a brake cable or something,
yeah. And so you only need a sort of a very sort of insignificant amount of additional tension put onto that cable, and it will fire.
Then as we start going at it with our extrication equipment, start manipulating this metal to try and free a casualty, that sort of undeployed ordnance, for want of a better description, could be devastating.
So, and I mean, I dealt with an incident a couple of years ago. Again, it was an ultralight aircraft, was coming in to land. It was what we call an unstable approach. So the pilot decided to sort of take off again. Unfortunately, didn't have enough airspeed, and he stalled and spun into the crash. Had one of these big PRS systems on board. Obviously, he didn't deploy it. So it was on what we call an unlicensed airfield. So there was no sort of airport fire cover. It was like, again, a general aviation, light aircraft, hobbyist airfield. So those on the airfield saw what happened, dialed 999, called the fire service. First crew on scene were a local retained.
Always will be in these very urban, agricultural areas. And
they were quite experienced in terms of aviation, because in the previous 5 years, they dealt with 2 other sort of general aviation incidents. So they arrive on scene pretty quickly, within sort of 5 minutes of the sort of the call, effectively, followed closely by the paramedics, and then turn up. And I always like to try and go to sort of the post-incident sort of debriefs where you get, and for me that's brilliant, because you get a timeline then from when from when that first call's made to when the stop message comes in, and so from an incident point of view, you can, when we arrive, we're sort of, that's generally all sort of finished as such. So. So to get an understanding of how the incident was managed, and it is very, very important. But just going back to the incident itself, so the first crews turn up. spotted that their fuel was leaking, so put down a fuel foam blanket. Great. Next thing they considered was battery. Disconnect
Lucky if they've
that.
got it available.
Yeah.
Because not all appliances carry foams or CAF systems or anything like that.
Yeah. So sort of sorted the electrics out, disconnected I think the battery was thrown clear, and then they sort of disconnected it. And then they
is there a system? Is there an online system where we can identify? Because for a lot of vehicles, we obviously have a variety of apps and whatnot. All of them are available.
Unfortunately, not.
No. So, like, again, you're relying on crew familiarity or a subject matter expert being present for that sort of thing.
So you sort of, and you know, in terms of aircraft, different types of aircraft, we're talking in the hundreds. Even within the UK, there are probably, say, 200 different sort of general aviation types that are potentially out there.
So the variations of where the power systems might be located on that.
I mean, it's a life job for someone to develop.
But I also sometimes liken it to trains when some of the systems are gas powered. You know, the doors and the windows. It's not a typical window like a vehicle you can easily break or get into, and obviously for the ultralights that there won't be any windows, but it looks like a vehicle, it moves and it's got fuel, but it's a very different beast. MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture and supply of incredible safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. That's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. That incorporates the M1 SCBA, which is the tried and tested BA set. Everybody uses it in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Then they combine that with the Lunar module, which is a wireless all-in-one device, creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. Honestly, the edge detection element of it, go and check it out. Honestly, go and have a look on their website. Edge detection, it looks like the Matrix. It's absolutely awesome. In terms of an enhancement tool for search and rescue, it's literally unrivaled. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Lunar, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake.
Going back to the incident, so the casualty was situated, as you would expect, within the cockpit area. At that point, they sort of then were started to think about extrication to try and get the guy out. Obviously, the paramedics were there to sort of try and stabilise the casualty. So that's what they did. They started, that process. As time went on, they sort of were working on the casualty, but it got to a point approximately 30 minutes into the incident where the casualty was. They decided they couldn't do any more for the casualty, and about the same time, someone then spotted that there was this BRS system fitted to the aircraft. But what had happened in this case, which was, well, again, not uncommon, but the BRS system will generally, if you can imagine an aircraft, and they're generally high wing, so you've got the cockpit and then you've got a high wing, and the BRS normally faces behind the wing and upwards, so it fires out upwards. But because of sort of the impact and then the deformation of the aircraft structure, this BRS system had been pushed forward and was pointing directly, or it's sort of, if it had gone off, it would have gone off into the cockpit or cabin area where the first responders and the casualty were working. So consequently, and when I went to the debrief, I was thinking, as you said, you go through the timeline, and I'm thinking, fuel, electrics. And I'm thinking, what about the BPRS? Because at that time, I didn't know how long it had taken them to spot the BPRS. And it gets to 30 minutes into the incident. And as I say, it was coincident that at that time they decided that they couldn't do any more for the casualty. So, but I'm thinking, what about the BPRS? What about the And it took 30 minutes for someone to realise.
That's what I'm thinking, because you put these hazards through a risk matrix and you go, okay, electricity, probably not a massive amount of voltage going on there, to be honest with you. Fire, if it does catch fire, people say, oh, it spontaneously caught fire. Yeah, but fire doesn't inherently burn you straight away, and we've got media there available, firefighting media to put it out. If something ballistic goes off, if something with a charge goes off, it's immediate. Its damage is fatal in milliseconds.
Yeah.
Often.
Oh, yeah. It's
that hazard is emerging and developing. It's very game over. I've saw even just like seatbelt, even just like drivers' headrests going off, or you see some of the American videos of people in there and they explode or they go off. They'll knock you clean out. I've seen them break a man's neck.
Yeah.
This thing is a whole nother. So how would people identify these things?
So now. You should the first thing I always say to fire services when I do my training is to every light aircraft incident you go to, treat it as though it's got one of these things fitted until you can categorically identify that it hasn't.
Okay.
Because then, you're going to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, last week we had one go off. And that wasn't sort of due to pilot initiation or anything else. It was down to as the aircraft hit the ground, the deformation caused, again, and it needs to be between 5 and 12 mil of sort of additional
movement, and the tension that's under.
Yeah,
because obviously you want it to be reactive. They only need to give a small pull to it. Yeah.
The cables are pre-tensioned anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So,
is there any YouTube videos available of these being deployed? I imagine there's some out there.
I've got one. I can.
Is it publicly available? I don't want to ask you to release something that's not okay to release.
If you were to go look on Twitter, and there was an incident at Duxford Airfield last week. Mm-hmm. So if you put, I'm not on Twitter, but if you put that in. I mean, we will endeavour to find that link and put it in the notes below this for people. But we've got video, and as I said, when I go out and do my training, I always show, my colleagues do as well. We always try and show videos of these things going off. But just if you want to have a quick look now today, you have a look at that, and that just shows last week's incident.
We'll try and get a link for that for people to go and have a look themselves.
But sorry. So where were we, Pete? I forgot where we were.
So I was asking you about identification of these. Yeah. So do they sit external to it? Are they? Could you see it on approach?
No, it will be sort of. It's all sort of within the fuselage structure itself. But what the sort of that you will see on some aircraft, and it should be all aircraft that have these things fitted, warning placards. Okay, which again, that document I've sent you will show you some of the sort of the warning placards that are sort of can be fitted to the sort of the external fuselage structure to give sort of first responders some warning that it has one of these things fitted. However, the issue with that is again, and we see this fairly regularly, and the incident last week, this aircraft didn't have warning placards fitted. It is now an airworthiness requirement, so as aircraft come up for their airworthiness renewals, these placards or warning sort of signs should be sort of fitted. But of course, it's like everything. As I said, there are always potential gaps. And the other issue with these placards is if there's a fire, and again we've dealt with sort of incidents where sort of again these aircraft the BPRS has not been sort of fired, but there has been an impact fire. Those placards can easily get sort of either burnt or destroyed in the fire. So again, you would lose that sort of early warning, so to speak. But as a result of the sort of the post sort of incident debrief that we talked about earlier on, one of the other sort of things we did was basically we had a JOL published, Joint Organisational Learning, and that was to publicise GInfo, which is a civil aviation database that anyone can access. And if you put in the last four letters of an aircraft registration, it will pull that aircraft up, and effectively, if it has a BRS fitted, you should see a warning tab or box come up to tell you that that aircraft has a BRS or BPRS fitted. And the idea of getting the JOL published was to try and sort of generate that publicity for it and make it sort of the awareness. However, I mean, I go out onto airports regularly with the airport fire service, and they don't even know about GInfo, and so it's, and again, hence my reason for coming on. I thought this is an ideal medium to try and again do more sort of publicity. So we are. And again, my colleague, and this is more of a sort of a general sort of question, or is regards certainly local authority sort of the training and awareness that local authority crews have when they sort of arrive at an aircraft incident, and it does seem to be sadly lacking in terms of again, you can probably tell me better that your thoughts on it, but my sort of thoughts are, and this is my personal sort of thoughts, is that then there does need to be an improvement.
No, 100%, mate. That was the fascination with me wanting to have this conversation, because it also actually came off the back of, and I'll give credit again to John Lord, because the work that I've been lucky enough to do with him and some of the courses that he's invited me on, I've been able to interact with a great number of firefighters, fire crews from our aviation department, and really, really interesting insights, and really shone quite an embarrassing light on my lack of awareness on the categorization of some of these runways and some of these airports and whatnot, how they manage flights, to generate hazards, their entirely different approach to firefighting from a tactical perspective as well, to be honest with you. So we have just pulled up this the information system for GInfo aircraft registry, so people can go and have a look at this. It really is a very easy to use system. So the main GInfo results screen show a number of data fields, the registration details, registration history, aircraft details, the owner's details, mortgage information. Crikey, it does have quite a lot of stuff on there. But like you say, you only need a couple of pieces of information to be able to. Where would people find the information for this? So it says there's a variety of field descriptions and examples how you could search for this. So the aircraft's registration mark without the G prefix.
Essentially, that's what you need to. So I mean, again, if again you've got to sort of and again, when approaching an incident, you need to sort of be mindful of all these. So you can't, if you can't readily see the aircraft registration.
Well, we've got binoculars on all the trucks. So like I say, it just say here you can have the aircraft's type or name, its serial number.
The aircraft registration should be on either side of the sort of the rear fuselage, and also will generally be on the underside of the left wing.
Okay.
So, which is not always easy if the aircraft is in an upright sort of is upright, because you're going to have to get fairly close to it. But generally, sort of on the rear fuselage, you can, and it's in quite large letters. Generally, you should be able to sort of within, not getting up too close, should be able to sort of have a look and see if you can see sort of the, let's say it'd be A B C D. It would be G, A, B, C, D, etc., and then you could then put A, B, C, D into the database, and then that will. And the idea behind that was obviously for sort of the initial crews on scene to sort of be able to do that in terms of sort of the hazard and incident sort of awareness, but also if information came via, say, air traffic control, and they had the aircraft registration details, the fire control could sort of they could do that. Again, that was another idea behind that, sort of get them
They
to
should
do
have this as control. So we have things like controlled information documents that our control centres have as generic prompts, food for thought, if you will, for the operational crews that are on the scene. Because again, the incident commander's got a million and one things to think about, and it's useful to have that person in your ear just saying, have you considered A, B, C? And just for people's awareness, this website, G-Info, is actually ran by the UK Civil Aviation Authority. So it's not a marketing ploy. It's not full of advertisement. It's not, you don't have to pay for anything. And it is upheld and sort of kept up to date by a recognised UK authority. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefights podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. A growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. So by joining the Patreon for just £3, you'll unlock everything we've ever created alongside discounts on merch, your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is. It's incredibly valuable and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service or who absolutely loves the job. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people do, it's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free, but we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And if you want to do something free, follow us on our YouTube, subscribe to it, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you listen to, and we want to keep growing, we want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Thank you for supporting us. We'll see you on the other side.
So, but just there has got to be a caveat with all this. It is not foolproof. We just after the incident I talked about earlier on, we attended a second incident. That aircraft had a BPRS fitted and it wasn't annotated on the database. So, databases are only as good as the data that is inputted on them, and you're often reliant on the private pilot himself to do that, particularly so like I said, it comes back to my earlier point. My first thing I say to all sort of fire service when I'm out there training, when you attend a light aircraft incident, you treat it as though it's got one of these things fitted until you can sort of categorically.
Same as a house fire, we always go, it's person's reported until we can affirm otherwise.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We always treat it worst case scenario and we'll cycle back from there.
Yeah. And again, I mean, as I said, so G-Info is just another tool potentially that you can use to sort of see if that aircraft potentially has a BPRS fitted. And then if it has, then obviously then that becomes down to a sort of a tactical decision as to how you're going to sort of then manage the situation. And it's interesting in the, often I have, when I go out to do my training, I've been said, well, can we use sort of like a ballistic shield to protect yourself from one of these things? Well, no, you can't. Can you use the sort of the airbag restraints to protect? I said no, because these things, they're.
I was going to say, we probably can't know the numbers because it's very technical detail, but they probably go off at a velocity and speed similar to a firearm.
Yeah, it's milliseconds. You'd never. There's no warning at all. It's less than 10 milliseconds, sort of.
So, what's the kind of safety cordon we're advising for something like this? Is there a sort of envelope of danger front or back? Because they always used to talk about, I'm just recalling some, so things that will be generic hazards in people's minds when they go to aircraft. I'm not laughing, but it's like, we always talk about radiation and nose cones. But we'll stay away from the nose cone radiation. And I think that's only in a small number of aircraft anyway, usually military or commercial large aircraft like Harrier jets and things like that. And then they talk about jet systems and so many meters away from the front, so many meters away from the rear, and all that sort of jazz. But for something like this, for the BPRS, what's a safe sort of distance? And we're not going to hold you to it, but like generically,
you've got to be talking a minimum 100 meters.
Really?
Yeah. And again, the other issue as well is so not only have you got...
Does it discharge something from the rear as well when it has that explosive? No, okay.
No, it all comes out forward. But the other issue as well is, so even if it doesn't sort of discharge, as it were, fire... The other issue again is it's a bit like a lithium-ion battery in that it becomes unstable again if it's been subjected to mechanical shock. So it's got sort of rocket propellant in there, which again, if it's subjected to mechanical shock and also a thermal shock, so fire, you've then effectively got an IED or an explosive, and there are pictures, of these things basically just going bang of their own accord,
randomly in a scrapyard whilst they're being investigated weeks after. On CCTV, you just see them go off.
On incident scenes, where there has been a fire or it's been subjected to severe mechanical shock. Again, they just go bang effectively, and then you're like, it's just like an IED going off. You've got then the fragmentation, because these things are held within a metal cylinder. You've also got sort of an aluminium slug that basically draws the parachute out. So you can imagine once that goes bang, and then you've got that fragmentation, that again can cause some, it's either fatal or it's a serious injury if you get in the way of it, sort of thing. So so again, we're trying to so I've got a colleague who sits on the NSCC transportation group, and we're trying to sort of push this sort of the awareness.
Who's that? Let's give him a little bit of credit and hopefully a bit of incentive as well.
Well, so John Lacey is the chief at Suffolk, and he runs I think it's the transportation or the aviation working group. So my colleague Frankie Shaw, who was at Big In with me when we met there, he sits on that group, and he's sort of like trying to push this sort of general awareness.
You've got to feel for people like that, because it's probably not something that's in fashion. And what I mean by that is floods, wildfires, they get a lot of attention because they cause a lot of damage and they happen more frequently. But something like this, it's one of those where it's never going to happen. And then when it does, everyone will point the finger at you and go, we weren't ready. Why don't you tell us about it? Or something like that. And you're like, I've been screaming at you into the void for God knows how long.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and I've sort of a little bit of frustration, although that sort of, I mean, again, when I went to this incident debrief a couple of years ago, there was a guy from that sort of fire services training department, and I said to him, like you have a conversation. I said to him, look, I'm more than willing to come out. We as an organisation are more than willing to come out and it's just, I'll give you a presentation just on, 2 hours. That's it, just to sort of, and this was recruit training, and okay, it may go in, it may not. But, in 5 years' time, when that recruit maybe, or as he's sort of climbing the ladder, attends a GA aircraft in a field somewhere, it may just, but I didn't hear anything back from it. And I get, I
think right message, wrong audience. So, like you say, and I'll sympathise with both sides of the coin there. In their very infancy of their careers, you would hope they will be surrounded by significantly more competent individuals. But the irony with a subject matter like this is, even like I've been in 18 years or something like that, I still have not a great deal of exposure. I've been to probably 3 aircrafts that have come down over 18 years. none of which were fatal. I think they were all ultralights, actually. Yes, I think they were. So, I think that sort of presentation to tactical commanders, level 2 commanders, station manager and above.
Yeah.
Because if you get something like this going down, you're at least going to get a supervisory officer, well, not a supervisory officer, but you'll get a level 2 incident commander at least.
Yeah, we've recently done sort of Hampshire of their sort of their CPD for their sort of station manager and above. So we've sort of given sort of a presentation or basically this sort of awareness to them. And just a shout out to a guy. So again, I go out to sort of many sort of airport fire services, and again, I give the sort of training presentation, and at one presentation, as you do, came out, sat down, had a cup of tea on the mess room, and you get talking. And one of the guys, he was sort of full time as a airport firefighter, but also retained at Basingstoke, and they're very close to like a GA airfield, and so we were talking about BPRS. And credit to him, he sort of, and I again just explained, what you can do about G-info, etc. And he took that away and sort of pursued it. And sort of about 8 months after sort of we initially met, he emailed me back to say that sort of information, G-info information, has been integrated into Hampshire's sort of training package.
And that's what you want, isn't it? So and that's always my sincere interest with conversations like this. If you give them the links and just try and ignite that, just try and get them over the hump, because they will turn around and people will hear this, and we get messages all the time. I heard this great thing on episode whatever. I took it to our tactical meeting or our risk committee or something like that. And there's 1,000 people trying to get 1,000 of their own priorities in there. But you just need that extra push for someone to get something, because it genuinely will, not being wishy-washy, it very, very will have the potential to save the life of a first responder or member of the public. Because when something like this goes wrong, it becomes a horror story that everyone tells. Yeah,
so credit to him, because he was junior firefighter retained, and he sort of pursued that. And Martin Comfort. So if you're listening to this, Martin, big thumbs up from me, because you deserve a lot of credit for pursuing.
But that also shows other people from other services that they haven't got to try and reinvent the wheel. So there will likely be some standard operating procedures, some sort of organizational advice, operational note, guidance of some form. I mean, we'll acknowledge National Operational Guidance does have a great deal of information around generic hazards and tactical approaches for dealing with aircraft, but it really is the nitty-gritty stuff like this, which is useful things for people to have in their head. What is it called? What does it look like? Because with the greatest respect to National Operational Guidance, and many guests will say it far higher ranking than me, it's not very easy to navigate, and they've recently put this weird login thing on it where you just can't access it when you're on the incident ground. It's not very good. And they're my words, not yours. But it's a bit of a headache. So I'd love to ask you a little bit, because we spoke before we came on about a series of, and this might seem, I just want to give some interesting examples, because some of these people may never attend, but there is a number of historical cases that I'd love to just take a short whistle-stop tour of. Because you mentioned 3 or 4 great ones. We've got the Comet disasters, the Pan Am 747, the Lockerbie, the Kegworth crash, Manchester Airport, and even in recent times, 2013, 2017, Leicester City Football Stadium. Some interesting things. If you could gleam any light on a few of those. Again, we're not going to put anything in the public domain that hasn't already been shared, but just to try and give a bit of an overview of the causes of these and the potential devastation that people might be met with. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drillbook. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters. So you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
So, I mean, if we sort of talk about sort of some of the more recent cases, probably, but we can certainly touch on the Manchester, which is quite a famous incident. But yeah, so the Leicester City incident was where and again, most people will know of the circumstances. The helicopter took off from sort of the football ground. And then sort of unfortunately came sort of there was a loss of control, and the aircraft unfortunately ended up impacting very close to within 100 meters of the.
It was just outside the ground, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So just for people's context, this was 27th of October 2018.
Yeah.
As a Leonardo AW169 helicopter crashed shortly after takeoff Leicester City's King Power Stadium in Leicester, England, while en route to Luton Airport. All people on board, the pilot and 4 passengers, including the club's owner, were unfortunately killed in the crash.
So, significant post-impact fire there, as I said. So, again, from a just a sort of, and again, you can imagine, well, you'll know, this is within sort of, quite a difficult incident in terms of the timing. And I don't know Leicester that well, but access, etc. You've got that sort of incident occurring. You've just got.
Well, anybody can imagine straight outside a large football stadium, one of the biggest clubs in the UK, a vast number of general public trying to self-deploy and offer help and support. Emergency services trying to grab hold of some sort of structure and control and create a bubble of safety around something that is a very volatile incident and a very rare incident. With confirmed persons on board who I believe were still alive, some of which when it did hit the ground.
But but from sort of once you've dealt with that initial incident, you've got the fire extinguished. You've then sort of, that's when sort of we sort of become directly involved in terms of them. Right, we've got to sort of determine. The cause effectively, and it starts right from sort of that point. You're starting to sort of get you're interviewing witnesses, and then we're also going to have to look to sort of do that initial investigation to sort of have a look to see what initial clues there are at the scene. And then once you've done that, you're then moving into a recovery phase as well. So we've got to recover that wreckage back to Farnborough to enable the sort of the investigation to run its course.
What is the relationship like in I'm just reading, and we'll share some entry from this. So it's the Air Accident Investigation Branch opened an investigation into the accident. Italy's, in fact, we won't say who it was, but there was someone representing the state of the manufacturer of the helicopter and a company from Canada, the manufacturer of the helicopter's engines. So you really do, and also representatives from Poland and Thailand providing assistance, and the America's National Transportation Safety Board. Crikey, there's so many moving parts to this. There's a French bureau. I'm not even going to try and
speaks or equivalent as well.
Yeah, wow.
So under the Annex 15 ICAO regulations, which effectively are the sort of the procedures for which we undertake an investigation. So when there's sort of an aircraft, most aircraft now, they're multinational in terms of engines, design. You're going to have passengers on board as well that will have sort of multiple nationalities. So whenever there's a sort of a fatal accident or a serious incident, under the ICAO protocols, sort of the investigating state or who has primacy is where the incident occurs, but then they sort of have an obligation then to invite other states that have a vested interest effectively. So as I say, it may be your passengers, or nationalities, or it may be engines are made by whoever. So that's why you get all sort of a multiple countries will sort of partake within the investigation, and that again is sort of part of the sort of the protocols that have developed over
and then
many.
There's the global checks for the other vehicles. It says a loss of yaw control was revealed to be the cause of the aircraft crashing. And then it's put out a series of bulletins, and you guys and girls put out a bulletin for checks to be done, all over the world on any other. Wow, it really is fascinating read. We'll share a link for this for people to get deeper into it as well. But
so we published that report. It took sort of a long time to publish the report. We published that report in November last year. If anyone wants to go onto our website, I think it's about a 230-page report into the sort of the incident and accident. So that will sort of explain in great depth.
We've got a link for that. I've just found it here. We'll put that in for people as well.
Yeah. But just sort of talking about the incident itself, the sort of the significant issue there was with the structure of the in terms of the incident. This is the initial investigation it's what we call a triple MF, or a composite fuselage. So, and triple MF is man-made mineral fibers. So effectively like fiberglass or carbon.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah. So what happens there when you get a fire? The resin that sort of holds all these sort of fibers in place in a matrix, that just burns off. And then you have these fibers that are then free to basically float around, and you can obviously very easily inhale them. And so again, our sort of
can cause a lot of issues with COPD and chronic obstructive pulmonary disorders, breathing difficulties. It's similar to asbestosis and the damage it's done there, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so again in terms of our sort of protocols, in terms of our respirators that we wear, our PPE that we wear, we're all very, very strict on when we're dealing with sort of incidents involving sort of any aircraft that's sort of either been burnt or is composite structure, and most modern aircraft now will be of a composite structure. Even light aircraft gliders are generally fiberglass now. It's strong, but it's also very light. So
you see a lot of it with a lot of the high-end motor vehicles as well now, don't you?
Yeah. So it's a sort of a big concern with us. And it kind of feeds into the wider UFP issue as well, because we're well aware of the triple MF, the fibers that are sort of and they're in terms of their size are what I suppose you could consider reasonably large. When you start thinking about the ultrafines, which are going down to submicron level, again, it's a whole sort of new ball game effectively. And because, the very nature of often when you're dealing with an aircraft that's sort of a composite structure and it's been sort of subsequently involved in a fire, there's no structural integrity there. It's just sort of like these. So if you can imagine, when you start sort of having to do the recovery process, you're potentially going to generate lots and lots of airborne sort of particulates, as you're undertaking that recovery process. So again, this is why our PPE protocols are so stringent. But it was interesting with the Leicester case. The local authority also became very concerned about the effect of that sort of particulate generation on the population.
Yes, it's one of those awkward things where you're like, well, how are you going to quantify that?
Yeah. So
and what do you intend realistically to do about it? Yes, you have a moral obligation to make the community aware of it, but
But what we did, we use the Institute of Naval Medicine as our scientific support for sort of that sort of thing, and very quickly they put in some air monitors, particulate monitors, to basically around the scene, to basically sort of do some monitoring to see if there was a problem. And yeah, fortunately, very, very quickly, we were able to establish that there was no significant risk to the general population from the activities that were going on.
It was a very open air environment. I remember seeing pictures of the scene.
Yeah. But even so, there was a concern that we sort of, this is what we're going to do to sort of, mitigate that sort of potential sort of hazard that's out there, or exposure to the local population. So again, it's just another tool that we've got that we can sort of bring to the party if need be.
So it might be a good segue from that to talk about, as one of the areas of topics of conversation we spoke about, was this aspect of evidence preservation, because it is something with regard to any incident that we have tried to get significantly better at in the Fire and Rescue Service. If you could just go into that area for us a little bit, because you've spoken really well about some of the work you've been doing with services and the NFCC and sort of the memorandum of understanding that you have in place. But when it comes to the thing has happened, we think we've got a grasp on the safety aspects of it. Help us understand the value of evidence preservation.
Well, it's all about basically creating a sterile scene, effectively, so that we can come in and basically, you've got a sterile scene, minimum sort of areas of disturbance, so that we can come in and then start sort of either collecting and again, often you'll be looking for the smallest, I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but the smallest nut or bolt, could be crucial, often. And it becomes very difficult if you go onto a scene, because the first responder's initial sort of response is life preservation. And that's always got to be the most important. That's what you do. That's what
life, property, environment. That's exactly. The general order we go for.
Life preservation has always got to be key. But after that, once that initial sort of rescue phase and firefighting phase has been dealt with, is to sort of create a cordon, an inner cordon, to sort of create a sterile scene. Effectively, it's exactly the same as a crime scene, effectively, so that we can then come in. And it's things like ground marks that, again, which wouldn't necessarily to sort of, the uninitiated wouldn't sort of consider, but often, when we attend an accident site, you may have an impact mark from a wing or whatever. And from that impact mark can sort of tell us a lot of information, speeds, forces, angles, etc. And if you get, with all due respects, a firefighter's size 14 boots walking all over it, we've lost that evidence then, which again could be crucial in building up a picture as to the events leading up to that sort of point of impact. And again,
because there'll be a numerous damage to the aircraft, but that initial point of impact will have been the tipping point, if you will, of how it took the trajectory it then took, and what took the first point of damage. Because up until that point, yes, it was an uncontrolled aircraft, but it hadn't hit anything yet.
Yeah, and again, the wider issue, I mean, you can imagine, you often get, it varies, but you often get sort of, and you may have a wreckage field that sort of...
There's stuff everywhere. Carnage.
Yeah. So, and you can imagine if you get trucks, ambulances, whatever, you've got to sort of turn up and do your life preservation and rescue and firefighting. But it's really to be mindful that, where you see sort of debris lying around, is just try to avoid touching it or moving it or disturbing it. And, then that initial, as I said, once that you've dealt with the initial sort of fire and rescue, creating that cordon, creating that sterile sort of environment so that it's protected, it is vitally important for us.
We always used to say, we always still say with fire investigation, is start really big. Start your cordon as big as you really possibly can, as far away as for the public you can manage. I mean, we're not talking miles here, folks. Let's be realistic. But try and close off entire streets. Push people back to adjacent streets. Don't let people come in and out of buildings and doors around it, because things may have collided with that. Things
Yeah.
may have been thrown from the wreckage. You can always shrink it down later when someone
Yeah.
goes, "Oh, that's a bit too much, Carl." And you're okay, fine.
Yeah.
If you're happy we've discounted those areas, we can shrink. You can't make it big. Well, you can make it bigger, but there's just so much noise, and there's the validity of what you may or may not find there, and the amount of people that have interacted with it makes it largely very difficult for you guys and girls to connect the dots.
So, I mean, there's sort of, not so much for the local authority fire services, but often with sort of airports, there's always going to be an issue there of where you've got a runway blocked and on a runway, and then there's the commercial pressures there.
They're losing millions.
Yeah. So
I need it back open. Need it back open, Carl. Need it open now. Need you on site. I need you to discount that area, and I want it open.
Yeah, but they nothing can be moved or touched without our permission. Whether that's on the telephone, we say, okay, photograph it all, video it, and then you move it, or no, sorry, you're going to have to wait until we arrive before it can be touched or moved. So it's basically sort of just to sort of, I always say to sort of, particularly the airports, it's when you've got sort of that initial incident phase has been sort of dealt with, and then you've perhaps got a little bit of sort of downtime, then think about your cordons, and if at the same time you can start recording the positions of the wreckage, take photographs, etc., and then you share that with us when we arrive, that's fantastic, because we've then again, it's only human nature, even us, we may be on a scene and you don't see something and you kick it, and then so all that sort of information that that sort of fresh information and pictures, videos, whatever we have, it just sort of helps in that sort of with the investigation and again, it's just normally what will happen is you'll know particularly when there's a fatal, you're the fire service will do the initial attendance, but then you're generally, once that initial sort of rescue firefighting phase has been completed, you will then hand over to the police, who are then responsible for sort of the security of the scene effectively. So it kind of, it's passed on, as it were, but it's just important to sort of, when you're at that initial stage as well, is to sort of think about the cordon and evidence preservation.
I find that absolutely fascinating, and there's so many threads I could continue to pull out there. I want to be people won't know we're recording this on an evening this week, and I want to be respectful of your time. One of the subjects that I did want us to get into, because we've spoken a lot around some light aircraft there, even some of the helicopter incidents, but I remember in the notes we spoke about the involvement of things like urban search and rescue with regards to unstable aircraft. I just thought that'd be really interesting to just expand on that if we could.
Yeah, so we sort of, as we often do, we'll go out and do sort of exercises with the USAR teams, etc. And about a year ago, we did an exercise, and it was treated as sort of a real time for us. So don't turn up straight away. Turn up a couple of hours into the incident. Yeah, and I know sort of exercises are slightly false, but what was an immediate of concern to us was when we turned up was so again, it slightly false, but you had an airliner fuselage, and the scenario was that there'd been a collision with a motor vehicle, and so the motor vehicle was trapped underneath the fuselage. So the task for the firefighters on scene was, well, we've got to raise the aircraft up to release any casualties in the vehicle that's underneath the fuselage, and also to make entry into the aircraft itself to, again, remove or deal with any casualties, rescue, etc.
Raise the aircraft. Jesus, that thing's got to be heavy.
So what they've done is they started sort of basically raising the aircraft up, so using airbags to sort of release, create space, etc. But what they hadn't done is stabilised or put any jacks or anything underneath the wings. So effectively, and what you also had sort of, they were starting to get also sort of to make entry into the fuselage, start cutting. So the risk there, and you can imagine, you only need to put a slight pressure on one of the wings. You're then
The
going
old
to
pivot fulcrum analogy.
Yeah.
If you only need to apply a smart amount of pressure at one end, don't you?
And then you're going to create a roll, and then it then becomes as I say, quite a significant issue. So so as soon as we sort of arrived, as you do, it was treated as a sort of a real sort of scenario. So we did our sort of, as we do for any scene or accident we turn up, that's our first consideration, is to do a site survey to determine, what the scene is, what are we dealing with, what are the hazards. And straight away we saw this, right, you need to get those wings stabilized, because, stop. Went back to the incident commander, and said to her, look, you need to stop immediately working on that aircraft. You need to stabilize those wings, because, there's a significant risk at the moment that you're going to end up sort of causing a roll, and then, you're going to cause further sort of issues in terms of entrapment or whatever. So
for people that are thinking, but when's that ever going to happen? So if these things come to rest on an airfield, you hope you've got some subject matter experts and whatnot there. But when we look at the ones, the Kegworth crash as an example and other examples, when these things come to rest beside a motorway and an embankment, when they've not landed as they're supposed to on their own, of their own volition, on their own wheels, you've got something that is very unstable. It's designed to be very nice and aerodynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not got a nice flat bottom to it that it's going to sit on something and just sit there ready for you to come and have a play with it. So getting a comprehension for the scale of the stabilization that you're going to have to implement, and the early request, the early assistance, the early mobilization of some of these larger urban search and rescue stabilization blocks, chocks, larger airbags, to deal with something of that size.
Well, if with the wings, it would be. I don't know whether you've got to remember that the sort of the wings can be 2, 3, 4, 5 meters from ground datum. So whether you've got any, the USAR have got any.
USAR have got cribbing, and they can make a series of shores effectively we would use for collapsed structures where you could support a floor. So you could put and I'm just not talking out my arse completely, but I'm just spitballing here. You could create a variation of shores that would take the load of that, and they would do a great job of it.
Effectively, that's what USAR did under our direction, was used some timber to basically effectively create a jack effectively, or a support under both of the wings. Right, that's now that those wings are stabilized, right, you can then get back on with raising the fuselage to get the vehicle out and release the casualties, and also you can make entry into the fuselage, because you're now not going to create that roll situation which you were in danger of before. But it was also interesting at that incident, or that exercise, that they also hadn't considered, again, when they were going to make entry into the fuselage, they hadn't considered from the door. Whenever you get on a sort of commercial airliner, it's the stewardesses, will point you in the direction of the doors. And then as you land and take off, I forget the exact phrase, but there's always you hear over the chime or the PA, doors are safe, etc. And what that's referring to is you've got slides that automatically deploy.
Yeah, and how do you think they deploy?
Yeah, and what they hadn't considered was, if we start cutting into a door, etc., then you're going to then potentially. So
there's something there that might deploy under a large charge. Yeah. These things open nicely from the inside out.
Yeah. So what potentially, if you open the door from the outside, the slide shouldn't deploy.
Yeah.
But if you open it from the inside, it will deploy when it's armed.
Yeah.
But of course, what you don't want to be doing is sort of cutting into that door potentially where you have potentially you've got oxygen cylinder or air cylinders, nitrogen cylinders that you use to inflate the slide, etc. There may be.
Well, I think of it like when you position a ladder to rescue somebody. As soon as that ladder's in there, they're going to try and get on it.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start to present yourself to the exterior of this aircraft, people are going to start opening doors and trying to get out and trying to get on things. There is there's a cabling or communication method, isn't there, where you speak internally straight to the pilot? I forget what that's called. Someone mentioned it to me.
Well, on airports, they will the airport fire service or
they can plug straight into the aircraft, can't they? Somewhere.
Well, they will use the radio to there's a specific frequency that they are in communication with the pilots, etc. So that will allow some determination,
two-way communication,
of how whether you're going to be able to release the open the doors, etc. What side the engine for, where there's a fire, etc. So again, it's all about that communication between the crew and the fire service in terms of sort of mitigating the risk to the evacuating passengers. So and they use 1216 as a frequency, a radio frequency that the airport command vehicle and officer will be in contact with.
But again, that's if you're on an airfield.
That's
Do you know what I mean? This is all those things. In the perfect scenario, it lands where it's supposed to, or even crash lands where it's supposed to.
Yeah.
It's usually the what ifs when people are like, "What would we do if?"
Yeah.
Mate, I found that absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for that. So for people's notes, if they look underneath this podcast, they will see some links that were provided there. So there's information they can go for the BPRS systems, the G-info, putting links to the Duxford Imperial War Museum investigation that we spoke about, the formal report from the AAIB with regard to the King Power Stadium incident. And we will also put a link under there to AAIB's main website, and also the CAA database, as we've already spoken about, the G-info. Karl, thank you so much for expanding on so many things there. I found it absolutely fascinating. Would it be appropriate to provide an email address or any form of communication? Feel free to say no and we can edit this out. But would it be appropriate to put a contact detail in there?
Certainly, we're more than happy for particularly the fire services. We want to reach out, we want to engage. So you've got my email address.
I've got your email, so I will place that one underneath. Please use it appropriately, everybody. I know they will. They've got a very good firewall and data system, so we had some communication interruptions today, so it will kick you out if you try anything silly, folks.
But I just sort of can't emphasize that enough. We want to engage. We want to sort of get out there and sort of whether it's training, whatever. We're more than willing to come out and engage with particularly the fire services or all the emergency services, but particularly the fire service. I tend to deal with the fire services. So
they're just nicer people.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Yeah. I love it when I'm sat around the mess table. I just sort of, to me, that's my environment. I love it. But
absolutely love it, brother.
Yeah. We are more than happy to engage, and we want to engage. So please reach out if you want any assistance from us. We're more than happy to do that.
Well, look, brother, thanks so much for your time. Some more love to everybody at the AAIB, and thank you to the overlords for permitting our conversation today, because it really has been a valuable insight for everyone to get some authenticity from somebody such as yourself, who says it in a way that we can actually understand it, which is very, very helpful for us. Again, we'll put all those links below, but please send more love to everybody, and look forward to catching up with you soon, brother.
Sure, no problem, Pete.
Take care.
Cheers.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our drive and purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.